Get started. I'm Steve Cox. I'm the museum board president, if you didn't know that, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mark Ferns, PG. Mark is a good friend of the museum and has received the IMG Medal in recognition of many field trips that he led for us through the rocks and rills of eastern Oregon. Mark received his master's degree in geology from the University of Oregon, and he had more than a 30-year career with the Oregon Department of Geology and Mining Industries. The last 20 or so, I believe, he was head of the Eastern office out of Baker City. In his spare time, he was also an adjunct professor of geology at Eastern Oregon University. So he's very familiar with this area. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot about the geologic history and mineral history of Eastern Oregon. So please give Mark a nice
Oh, let's see. This is the.
We have a battery issue real quick.
Oh, okay, well, we can wait here. It's a in way of introduction. I did spend 30 plus years at the Baker City office. I was born in Southwest Oregon at Phoenix in the gold belt of the Southwest. Raised down there, grew up within sight of Jacksonville, and for some reason acquired an interest in geology and in mining, the story of gold discoveries. A couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to begin working with the Baker Heritage Museum, putting together information for their new gold display, which is now available for viewing at Baker City. And as I was doing that, I started doing research on the wheres and hows of the various gold discoveries around the state. At the same time, my father, who was in his mid-90s, was beginning to lose interest in life, so I began putting together stories that I could find about discoveries of gold in Southwest Oregon. And after doing all this, it had occurred to me that there's a lot of stories to be told about gold discoveries in Oregon. And when I say in Oregon, I mean the Oregon country, everywhere from Southwest Oregon to the South Pass up into British Columbia. Because it was recall when gold was discovered, Oregon was still a territory. And like it or not, this part of the world where we're sitting now was considered part of Oregon. So one thing that I discovered as I was going through my work is that there's a lot of misconceptions about the discovery of gold in Oregon. One thing that you need to realize that Oregon was early at work. The Oregonian, the people from the Willamette Valley, they were among the first to reach the California gold fields, and they were first to find things. Now, you see a lot of histories that are written up that repeat the story that two disappointed miners from Northern California found gold in the Rogue River Valley in Southern Oregon in December 1851. A constant refrain, well, for some reason the folks in the Willamette Valley were just too ignorant to know what gold looked like, and they had to wait for people coming up from California to show where it's at. So where was gold first discovered in Oregon? Well, see the question marks. Is there a pointer on this?
I don't think so.
Okay, then I better not point. It could have been Southwest Oregon, could have been in the Willamette Valley, could have even been in Eastern Oregon.
This guy right there.
Right here.
I understood it was not too far from Grants Pass in Cape Junction.
It was on for a second. It doesn't work on the screen.
Doesn't work on the screen.
Yeah, the red ones don't put on my screen.
Okay, well, we'll let it go at that. But the questions mark are places where gold could have been the first to be discovered. And when? Was it 1851 in Southwest Oregon? Perhaps in 1849 during the beginnings of the gold rush. Maybe even 1848, just after the discovery of gold in California. We've all heard the stories of the Blue Bucket Mine, 1845, perhaps then. Or perhaps even in 1841. 1841? Yes, 1841. Gold was almost discovered in Oregon. It was almost discovered by members of the Wilkes expedition. That was a major exploration group that was sent out of the East Coast in a 4-year expedition, involved 650 men and 6 U.S. naval ships, 4 of which were warships. They spent 4 years sailing around the Pacific, exploring the islands, visiting Hawaii, Samoa, New Zealand, sailing around Australia, sailing around the northern edge of the Antarctica. And on the later part of that voyage, they stopped to chart Oregon. And this is a map that they produced from their 1841 expedition. There were 2 groups. One group came north, I believe 4 ships, landed up by Puget Sound, spent several months exploring the area around the Columbia River. Second group came in, 2 ships entered the Columbia River, and one of the warships, the USS Peacock, went aground and was lost. So here they were with one of their major ships missing, and they decided, well, one way to deal with having not quite enough room on ships was to send the boys south. So they sent a group of 35 men and were headed south to California and San Francisco. Among that group was James Dana. Yes, that James Dana, the father of mineralogy. At the time, he was a young geologist. This was one of his first expeditions. If you want to read some of the story or some of the reports, he wrote up beautiful reports on the Hawaiian Islands, Coral Islands. As the group went south, as they were approaching Fort Umpqua, they received word that the Indians to the south were opposing the expedition. The Indians to the south were in a quasi-state of war with the Hudson's Bay Company. Hudson Bay Company trappers on their way south to San Francisco had been attacked. One of the trappers related how maybe for part of the reason they were being attacked was that he fed some guests some poisoned meat. So the relationships between the Indians and the Hudson Bay Company were not good. All the area that you'd seen earlier in the Oregon Territory that had been explored by members of the expedition, the Indians, whether they were Blackfoot or Shoshone or Yakima, they all interacted friendly. But when it came to the ones to the south, all bets were off. They were known variously as the Rogue or the Rascal Indians. If you take a look at the map there, you see the trail crosses a river that's labeled the Shasta River. That's today's Rogue River. And at the time, the river to the south, the Klamath, the Rogue was thought to be a tributary, and it was known as the Shasta River. If you look up just a little bit to the north of where it's labeled Shasta River, you'll see the label Nasty River, because that's how the trappers referred to the Indians, as those nasty Indians. Relationships were not good. The expedition was in fear of being attacked at every moment once they entered the Klamath. They started down up the South Umpqua River, crossed into Cow Creek, and somewhere near where the Greenback Mine is located, they stopped to pause a day. They paused because they had lost some equipment earlier in the day, so they sent people back to look for it. And Dana and the others, they spent the time looking at the rocks. And now quote, "The rocks in this neighborhood are here and there intersected with veins of quartz, and masses of that mineral are found strewn over the whole country." He later reported the Taukos and Allied rocks of the Umpqua and Shasta districts resemble in many parts the gold-bearing rocks of other regions, but the gold, if any there be, remains to be discovered. Dana wrote that before the California discovery. After learning of the California discovery, he went on to write, "There is little doubt that this gold district will be found to have very wide limits." And more than 50 years later, Ed Browning and Led Hannum made the strike on Grave Creek that would lead to the Greenback Mine. You see the oval to the left, that is somewhere in there is where Dana had camped. And you'll see the label of where the Greenback Mine is. They were somewhere, they were within 5 miles of what would become the richest lode mine in southwest Oregon. A side story about Browning and Hannum, they were looking for a pocket that was feeding the rich placers that were mined in the creeks. They made the strike, thought it was probably just a pocket, like most southwest Oregon pockets, only go down 50 or 100 feet. So they sold it to the Victor Gold Mining Company of Colorado. And later they complained bitterly that because they had been swindled, because the Greenback went on to produce over $3 million worth of gold. The discovery had to wait until news of the California strike reached Oregon. The news didn't reach Oregon until early August of 1848. That's when a sailing ship from Hawaii made an unexpected call to Honolulu. And the captain got off and they started buying up all the digging equipment they could find, telling the locals, well, they needed it for farming down in the Sacramento Valley. A couple of days later, a British frigate unexpectedly put into the settlement, and the British frigate they blew the whistle on the Honolulu's captain. So he begrudgingly turned over dispatches from the papers in Hawaii that described the California strike. And I'll read it to you. This is what first appeared in the Willamette Valley in August of 1848. "An exceedingly rich gold mine has been discovered in the Sacramento Valley, and all classes and sexes have deserted their occupations and rushed en masse to the mines to make their fortunes. The gold taken from this newly discovered mine is not gold ore, but pure virgin gold. It is procured by the simple process of digging and washing. It is obtained by the rate of 2 to 4 ounces per day by each laborer. Goes on to say, shovels, spades, pickaxes, and other digging implements commanded enormous prices. Many unable to procure these were digging with knives, sticks, and their fingernails. You'd understand why the Honolulu's captain was looking for digging equipment. Now that news sent the Willamette Valley into a frenzy. More than 2/3 of the men promptly dropped what they were doing and headed south for California. There you got a Oregon Free Press, September 2nd, 1848. Recent arrivals from the vicinity of the gold diggings have created an astonishing excitement in our midst. By far the larger portion of our male population will have left to dig for gold before the expiration of the present month. So they were on their way. And they were fortunate because they were headed south in summer of 1848. They were going to arrive in California before the big rush of 1849. Now, the folks that were leaving, they were neophytes. They were good at digging, but when it come to recognizing gold or panning for it, not so much. One guy that had some experience was Thomas Dove Kaiser. He was born in Buncombe, North Carolina, right next to the Carolina gold fields. And he evidently had some understanding of what he was doing. So you could say that the first discovery of gold in the Oregon country occurred just north of Salem, where the present town of Kaiser is, when the Oregon Free Press reported in October, we have received a few small particles of gold that were washed by Mr. Kaiser. It is the pure article, and although the quantity produced is inconsiderable, it is nevertheless sufficient evidence of the fact that there are gold mines in Oregon. Now, some of the guys prospected and continued prospecting down there and traced the gold into the Santiam River. And later on, they would make that, follow that on up to discover the districts in the North Santiam and Quartzburg and the Cascades. Now, the band traveling south along the Siskiyou Trail in the summer and fall of 1848, they didn't have any real clue of what they were doing. However, they found a place in California where it was a good place to learn. And some of them were proved to be good, quick learners, returning in the fall with gold. They'd learned how to do it. It is estimated that before 1849, nearly $2 million worth of gold made its way north to the Willamette Valley. Enough to result in the coining of several thousand Oregon beaver coins by the end of 1848. And one thing, when they come back north, one of the reasons they come back north was that it was expensive to try to winter over in California. There wasn't a lot of food, there's a lot of shortages. Accommodations were pretty poor. So why spend your time down there when you can go back to their home in Oregon, winter over there in relative comfort, and come back the next spring? Well, when they went north, they noticed that the rocks along the trail, the Siskiyou Trail, looked a lot like the rocks where they had found gold in California. And Lee Laughlin later related the experiences of one California-bound party of 49ers. After passing Point of Rocks this morning, we concluded to stop and prospect on the Rogue River. Some of our party prospected on the bars of the river and found gold. We'd never thought of stopping there to mine, as we had started with the gold mines of California. Previous to this, on our way up the South Umpqua, we had prospected for gold on the river bars, and I had also found it there, I think somewhere near the mouth of Myrtle Creek. One of the other reasons that they were in a hurry to get to California was the local Indians, who weren't too pleased with Hudson's Bay Company, were less pleased with these hordes of miners tramping through their backyard. They thought they had reached reasonable agreement with some of the miners who, as they're making their way south, would part with a cow or something for the Indians in exchange for passing through the land. But not all the prospectors did that. So the Indians, they figured the way to acquire livestock was to shoot them full of arrows. So relationships were not real good. Those first discoveries or reports of gold were given to Governor Joe Lane, who made a report to the Oregon legislature, which read, "Gold has been found in several places in sufficient quantity to induce the belief that there are mines, perhaps extensive ones, of the precious metal within the borders of our territory." Now, Lane, who was nearing the end of his appointment, decided to go south. The reasons for going south were, first, to secure a peace arrangement with the Indians that would allow the miners to pass through. The second was to see for himself whether there was gold in the southern part of the territory. And the third was to complete his journey to California, where he could say, "I've had enough with this job. I'm leaving you. You're on your own." So south he went. And on the South Umpqua River, his party found gold in sufficient quantity to pay for mining. And this is a report from another expedition, the Klamath expedition, which made a report in September of 1850 that about $12, the product of 30 pans full of earth. Messrs. Scott and Butler dug on one of these bars for about 3 hours with a pan and obtained $10, thus earning at the rate of $20 per day each. Governor Lane and his party also found gold here on a southern tour this spring, finding it more or less on every bar. So if you wanted to point to a spot where minimal amounts of gold were first found, it would have been on the South Umpqua River near Myrtle Creek. The first strike, well, after receiving promises from the Indians that the attacks would stop, he headed south for the Klamath River, where he found gold near Wairika. He also found that the peace agreement that he had struck with the Indians wasn't holding quite that well, so he decided to head south for safer pastures at Redding. The first real gold strike was made on the Klamath River by Abraham Thompson in the March of 1851, after he saw the gold in the muddy roots of grass churned up by pack animals. Claims were quickly staked on a 30-foot square flat that gained fame as Thompson's dry diggings. Thompson's party were headed south, trying to reach the new discoveries on the Klamath River further down the river at Scotts Bar. The strike that they made at the dry diggings was literally incredible. The party brought with them lumps of unusual size. Our informants state that they have one lump worth $800, and others varying from 1 to 3 ounces. Stephen Meek returned to this city a few days ago with quite a handsome return for his labor, having averaged near about $400 per month. And that first strike in Wairika brought more explorers south from the Willamette Valley. And the first wrist strike within Oregon was made on May 1851 on Josephine Creek. And Josephine Rawlins, 17-year-old girl at the time, was with her dad. You could read this. What they did, they were prospecting for gold along the Rogue River near the mouth of the Applegate River. And there they were contacted by Chief John, who was the leader of the band of Indians that lived on Applegate Creek. And he told them that he knew where he could find gold, and they offered a couple of pairs of blue jeans, so he led them to a place in the neighboring valley, the Illinois Valley, where a different band of Indians lived. They spoke a slightly different language. They had different customs. John's band and Limpy's band, the Takelma in the Illinois Valley, they weren't the best of friends. And I think one reason that John led them was that he figured there's probably gold on the Applegate, but he'd just push these guys onto the neighbors and let them sort it out for themselves. The other possibility says we remained there until the middle of August when the Indians plotted to capture us all. And Josephine eventually headed for Wairika, where she would marry a man. And incidentally, yes, she is the Josephine that Josephine County is named for. One other thought was that John had a son named Adam. And evidently, Adam, according to the story, took a fancy to young Josephine and had set about trying to acquire her. The first Jackson County strike was made on Rogue River at Big Bar. The miners that made it were Lemuel and Worthington Bills. They began mining in the summer of 1851, and Big Bar is located at the foot of Table Rock, home to the largest Indian bands. And the Bills, they took great pains to establish friendly ties with the local Indians. Worthington married a niece of Chief Sam. The rest of them building houses for John, for Chief Joe, and Chief Sam, upon the condition that he should not permit the Indians to molest in any manner the whites in that section or those traveling through it. Unfortunately, that good state of affairs did not long remain. After the Jacksonville strike, things became tense, and the other white miners accused the Bills of trying to stir the Indians up against the whites. The Jacksonville strike was discovered in 1852 by packers. They were packers that were coming north from Wairika, but they were packers that had a pack route that led from from the Willamette Valley to Wairika. They were carrying supplies down and then coming back for more supplies. On their way back for more supplies, they stopped and visited with the Indian agent and told him that one of his workers had found a little gold on Jackson Creek. So they decided to take a stop. But again, after a heavy rain, Klugage found an exposed ledge of rock where the soil had washed away. Taking his bowie knife from his belt, he dug around in the rocks and found sand and found pockets of nuggets of gold. Discovery just like Wairika. Chunks of gold right on the surface. And that started the rush into Southwest Oregon. And over the next 6 years, thousands of miners spread out. They found placers everywhere. They found them in the streams, in high channels, and along an ancient coastline that stretched from Fort Lane to Wairika. And that was the beginning of the rush into southwest Oregon. Now, some of the prospectors started looking for the mother lodes. The first pocket was found in 1859 by a Cherokee miner, Charles Sonora Hicks. And I enjoy the quote from the Daily Alta in 1860. At every stroke of his pick, he would unearth and increase the metallic currency of the world at the modest rate of $500. When much excited, he called to the crowd, "No use for the mint, boys. Here it is with the eagles already on them." The chunk in my hand there is not from any of the pockets in southwest Oregon, but it does kind of give you an idea of what the pockets may have looked like. The most famous of the pockets was at Gold Hill. It was found in the January of 1860. It was found by three men known as Mr. Hay, Mr. George Ish, and a person known only as the Immigrant. We can't find his name anywhere. It is suspected that he went by the name the Immigrant because the miners in Wairika and Redding and Point South had questions to ask him about missing livestock. So he was a little shy about having his face seen by others. They come up the side of the hill, and as it reads, broke them up and sat down amazed, ready to believe the hard yarns of Munchausen or the fictions of Arabia. The lead was a quartz ledge about 12 feet long and 20 inches wide, permeated with threads of gold, paying more than $10 a pound. Other stories about it. They had a good thing, but they had to register the claim. And Jimmy Hay explained to his partner, the Immigrant, that he knew that George Ish had a fondness for whiskey. So he went into Jacksonville with Ish, hoping to have him keep his mouth shut. Didn't work out. Ish got to the bar and let it all out. Jimmy, he headed south or north, found his immigrant friend. They took a grub stake from the cabin and they tented on the discovery. And by daylight the following morning, there were at least 150 men on the ground, showing conclusively what a great advertising medium bad whiskey is. They said by that Sunday, you could have taken the sense of the entire county on the old hill. They had gold, there was gold everywhere. They had to beat them off with sticks and get up there picking up gold. There's one of the guys that later bought in, John Miller, said people they'd pick up and come right into the work and pick up specimens. One day I was there alone and they got so thick I had to establish a deadline and guard it with a shotgun. It must have been quite a sight. And another pocket was found later in the 1890s, right on the stage road that had been active for 40 years, right on the Siskiyou Trail. Family, the Hirschberger and his kids, after uncovering a few inches of earth, they found a vein from 6 to 8 inches of width, from which in 2 hours they took out $500 worth of almost solid gold. Laying there right on the stage route. for 50 years. Now for you guys, well, what about that Lost Blue Bucket mine here on the east side? Well, there's the route of the Meek Wagon Train, the Oregon Trail, and some of the questions of where gold may have been found. And as time went on, the stories multiplied. They found berries in the water and found gold nuggets. They could have filled a blue bucket. They had hammered a nugget flat on the iron-rimmed wagon wheel. A toolbox filled with gold nuggets fell off the wagon during a river crossing. So many different stories and so many places to look. And if we go back to the early newspaper reports, we find no mention of the gold on the 1845 Meek Wagon Train. We do find a mention, though, that there were stories of gold having been found along the Oregon Trail. A conviction in the minds of several gentlemen that they have seen a substance in Burnt and Powder River valleys every way resembling the California gold, except that it is a shade lighter in color. So, several parties, rather than heading south for California, headed east for the Powder River. And in December, the news came back. The gold exploring parties on the Powder River have returned, bringing evidence and confirmation of the adage that all that glitters is not gold. The North Powder crossing is filled with gold-colored mica, very abundant gold-colored mica. Lucia Williams wrote later in 1851, the sand and moon were full of shining particles. They were so eager to wash gold that they could not eat. Unfortunately, well, even when in the last years I spent with the department, about every other year somebody would bring in a vial full of painfully panned mica from the North Powder, and I'd have to look at them and tell them, sorry, but you're not the first. Now, had the miners been experienced and known what they were looking for, if you go further up the Powder, you'll see some black lines. Those are mining ditches that brought gold water to the placers. And you'll see that there were placers on the upper end of North Powder. And had they known what they were doing, it's possible that they could have found gold. Now, they went south and they made the Burnt River, but by the time they got there, it was late in the season. It had snowed. It was cold. The water was so cold, nobody could stand to put their hands in the water. So they gave up and they turned back. And had they continued on down to that lower right-hand circle, it's a near certainty on the trail they would have found gold. It was there. But they gave up. They went back to Portland and they let the story out that all you could find in Eastern Oregon was fool's gold. So there were stories. Somebody had found gold along the Trek West, so if they found gold, it couldn't have been along the Oregon Trail because everybody by then knew that it was fool's gold. Now you can read there that the early blue bucket stories can be traced back to the Heron family. And Mr. Heron, he saw it with his eyes and handled it with his hands. One piece was nearly as long as his little finger. It looked yellow like gold and was heavy as lead. Another piece was about the size and shape of a pumpkin seed and was hammered out until it was half as large as the palm of his hand. It's like that's pretty good evidence that somebody had found gold along the Meek track, but it wasn't a blue bucket full. In 1860, strikes in Washington and Colorado Territory had led 4 parties east in search of the Lost Wagon Train gold. A letter from Walla Walla in September read, "It is known to most of your readers that there are hundreds of men now prospecting on the rivers and streams heading into the mountains east and southeast of this point. And among this number is Captain Pierce. Captain Pierce reported that he found gold. Captain Keeney reported that he found gold. Beyond a doubt, we did find a good prospect on Bird River, and a better one on the Powder, and still better on the Grand Ronde." The company led by Pierce set off from Walla Walla, 1861. Now, Elias Pierce, you folks in Idaho, you should be familiar with him. He is credited or blamed for the name Idaho. He made the first discovery on the Clearwater. There's quite a story about how he discovered it, various stories. But he was a real explorer. He wasn't much of a miner. Word of the gold on the Lapwai Reservation reached Portland and began a gold rush east. Keeney, he had made his way south in the early years, made $2,000 on the American River in 8 short days. He later, after leading the expedition in 1861, he'd go on to find gold at Pocahontas, just west of Baker. And I think probably some of you are familiar with the story of the Lost Soldier's Ledge in eastern Oregon. Well, Captain Keeney was the operator of the ferry that the soldiers came across. They showed him the gold. And he thought he knew where he could find it. So he sold his ferry and began his search. But he wasn't able to search very long because he'd had an accident. His pistol fell out of his holster, struck the ground, and it ranged up through his thigh and killed him. So the man who might have been able to track down where the soldier's ledge was died of an accidental gunshot wound. In 1861, the lost diggings were found. The excited news reached the Willamette Valley. The paper printed it up, the August 26th Oregonian. The prospecting party have returned from Meek's Cutoff and report favorably. 7 men from Marion County, Smith, Cranston, Matten, Clinton, Rogers, had spent 4 weeks on their search. And they had given up, and returning, they met a group coming from the Willamette Valley with provisions. Amongst the group coming back from the Willamette Valley was Adams. And he talked Cranston, Clinton, Rogers, and another unnamed individual to turn around and go back and continue looking. And they reported that they saw quartz in abundance. But we deterred by the Indians from digging on that creek. But they dug down in a neighboring ravine and found a fair prospect of gold. The strike is said to be made at the head of the west branch of the Malheur River, where coarse gold averaging 10 cents to the pan was found in shallow diggings, only 3 feet to bedrock. Adams went on to claim that Keeney from Eugene was in the neighborhood and taking out large quantities of gold. And Pierce of Idaho fame was doing 80 miles further down near the mouth of the Malheur River. Now, that stirred up some excitement in the Willamette Valley. Now, other members of the Matten party, they got to counting days. And they decided that there was something wrong with Adam's story. They had been in that, they had not been nowhere near the headwaters of the Malheur when they turned back. And Adams and his party claimed that they managed to make it all the way to the northwest fork of the Malheur and dig and find gold and make their way back in a matter of a couple of weeks. It just couldn't cover that much ground in that period of time. And so the Oregonian advised, we advise our farmers not to give away their farms on the supposition they can shovel up gold on the Malheur River. The doubt stirred up a controversy. But Adams and Rogers, they held to the story. We have some 60 or 70 men with us. We should be very foolish to put our necks into a halter by leading these men on a wild goose chase. We have no doubt that the truth will show that we have larger prospects for gold than have ever been found in Oregon or California. Well, that didn't work out too well. By the time they reached the Harney Basin, it was clear to the other members of the party that Adam's story about finding the gold was a humbug, and Adams had never been to the Malheur River. And they argued that a rope would look just fine around Adam's neck. The Oregon Democrat reported that story from some of the people that come in later. Mr. Wiley says that the humbug party was pretty incensed and asserted their determination to hang him. Cranston and one or two others were implicated and they did not find the mines within 5 days. And during this period of conflict in the group, it split into 3 groups. One struck out for the headwaters of the John Days River, intending to follow the river down to the Columbia River and the Dalles. The other 2 struck east, headed for the Oregon Trail and the Powder River, intending to go to the Salmon River mines. All 3 parties went on to discover gold. Now, in my research, I've been unable to find any mention about Adams or Rogers or Clinton. I can't find their names anywhere. And I'm not too sure that somewhere on the Burnt River there lies a shallow grave with 4 men in it. And I'm sure the reason that we never hear any story about that is because all 3 parties would later go on to discover gold. And it would look kind of embarrassing to admit that you had lynched somebody that had led you to a gold mine. Now, one story has it they required Adams to leave the company. The party to which our informant, Mr. Crittenden, belonged returned by ways of John Days River. At the head of the river, then, for 50 miles down, they found excellent gold prospects. 50 miles. No doubt many people will return. Some of the miners returned early. Solomon Richards and 32 companions left Ty Valley with animals and provisions in late November, intending to spend the winter at the site of their earlier discovery. And arriving at Otter Bar in January, they found they had misjudged the weather. They were up to their ankles in snow, no forage, so they decided to send their pack animals back to the Dalles to gather additional supplies, and I think also to find forage. They were small groups, and the last group, member of the last group, staggered into the camp on February 9th after surviving an Indian attack. After he recovered, the remaining prospectors abandoned the camp and set off downstream, looking for the missing 13 miners. All they found was signs of violence, no survivors. So, like the Indians in Southwest Oregon, the local inhabitants were not too interested in having miners poking around in their backyard. The other two parties decided to make their separate ways to the Oregon Trail. One party, led by W.H. Marshall, reached the Powder River where they found gold. They were short on provisions, so they returned to the Dalles and then on to Portland. They reported that the best prospect was a $1.25 pan of dirt, and they were well satisfied and intended to go back in the spring. I do not know exactly where they made the discovery. I think it was probably at Union Flat, next to where the Union Creek campground is. The Powder River, the third group, they made the discovery that made the news. Henry Griffith dug a prospect pit on the 19th of October, 1861, and found, they were small, but he found this chunky gold nuggets. Enough gold that they decided that they were going to stay. And some of them went on to Walla Walla, where they were trying to exchange their gold for supplies. And the merchants were suspicious. It was bright, heavy gold. Didn't quite look like the stuff that had come from the Clearwater. But they discovered that, yes, it was gold. And it's chunky yellow gold. Chunky yellow gold, just like the chunky yellow gold from Southwest Oregon and the California mine. So the rush was on. Every day during the past week, miners have been leaving the Willamette Valley for the John Days River, the Powder River, or Salmon River mines, hoping if they cannot work the mines in winter, they will at least be the first in spring. They hope to winter in the Grand Ronde Valley. The rush was on. Thousands are on the trail. And in the spring of 1862, it had been a heavy snow year. Many of the miners coming from Walla Walla, they had the shortest distance to go. They got down there, they found nothing but snow and high water. Saw the mica at North Powder, declared it all a humbug, made their way back to Walla Walla, declaring it a humbug. It's just a repeat of this fool's gold that was found earlier. No gold in that country. No doubt hundreds on the trail hither have turned back. Indeed, near 3/4 of those who were with us retraced the road over the snows again. The fact is, we are too early, and this mountain's still full of snow. We cannot prospect. Many came expecting great things and not finding it in their hands have left in disgust. Such men should never have come. Turned out to be some humbug along the Oregon Trail. That next year, 1862, camps were discovered in Canyon City, Elk Creek, Olive Creek, Willow Creek, all of them with their own stories. Thousands of miners finding gold in many different places. 1863, the first lode discovery. The man who made the discovery was William Rockefeller and his brother Albert. They had bought a prospect. They were from Southwest Oregon. They had seen the Gold Hill pocket several years earlier. They knew what the promise that a pocket might hold. That soon became the Virtue Mine. 25 pounds of rich ore, estimated to assay more than $4,000 a ton. There's a sample of Virtue Mine ore that's now in the Baker Heritage Museum. So I invite you to come up and take a look at it. Little background on William Rockefeller. He was one of the first to reach Northeast Oregon from Jackson County in 1862. He couldn't find any gold, so he set up a express business. He carried gold and mail between Walla Walla and the gold field. Most of his business came from Idaho, from the Boise Basin, even up into the Bannock. Lots of stories about him. His daughter wrote more of a diary about his family and how he avoided rustlers or robbers, and how he found the gold. Now go back to no gold along the Oregon Trail. Black line is the Oregon Trail. The circle is the Virtue Mine. There are other mines that were closer to the trail. The route of the trail took it within 1.5 miles, 2 miles of one of the most fabulous discoveries, surface discoveries in eastern Oregon. For nearly from 1848 to 1860, 12 years, travelers headed west along the Oregon Trail, knowing of the gold that was found in California. Also hearing the stories that nothing but fool's gold could be found around the Oregon Trail, had passed that by. And the rest is history. And the dots there represent reported gold showings from the Oregon Department of Geologic and Mineral Industries Milo database, and give you an idea where they're at. And that's about all I have to say for now. If you want to learn more, there's a book out there that'll tell you a lot more about the discoveries around Oregon. And I've embarked on trying to put together the stories for the entire Oregon country, which will expand it into Idaho and up into British Columbia.
Do they ever find gold on Sucker Creek?
Yes. There's right just west of Graveyard Point, right where the creek makes a sharp jog to the south. There's a prospect in there that was worked during the Depression years. There's 2 adits in there. The locals say that they had a little gas-powered mill that they operated. And I know that during the exploration days that one of the exploration outfits found a zone in there distributed chalcedonic quartz veins that would run about 1/10 of an ounce. So, yeah, the stories of gold being on Sucker Creek, I think there is some basis to it. And for those of you who are down there collecting the agate in the Graveyard Point, and you see the metal in the mixed in with the agate there, you might want to take a second look at it.
Do you have a map of all the active mines in Oregon right now?
No, I don't.
Those are the ones that...
Those are the reported discoveries. Somewhere in there, if you get most of the discoveries were around the old Paleozoic terrains next to the Geo-Cretaceous intrusion. There are younger deposits, and I think it's, oh, to be younger and able to get around in the brush again.
This is close to the two islands out there.
Hmm?
You know, old, Thomas Condon, and his two islands. You look at those two islands.
Yeah, they're the two islands, all right.
Yeah. Thomas Condon was,
Yeah.
probably his first geologist.
Yeah. Yes.
I've heard recently about some gold trend material that runs from Fayette up through north of Boise. Through there. Do you know anything about those?
No, I don't. There's these younger hot spring systems. I don't think that would be one of those, but we're still learning a lot about what actually drives the different periods of mineralization in the Northwest. And I can say for certain that since I've retired, I've seen things that while I was working, I would have said, well, no, that's not possible. But it's a bigger story out there, and I think with time, more discoveries will be made.
Folks, that really completes our allotted hour. If Mark could stay a little while and answer specific questions, that'd be great. But let's give him a nice hand for